Meta. From what I understand in psychology, there's probably a hurt, small, helpless feminine side in Fred Burks that has not been grieved and come to terms with. And so when a healthy part of the psyche comes forward and asks for validation and support that was never given to Fred Burks by his father, by his cult, he dishonors that same part in another, that same part in the culture that was and is dishonored by him and to him. He dishonors himself in that terrain, etc. And this is by no means a unique thing or a criticism of Fred Burks. This is what happens, and it happens all the time in a psychologically illiterate culture and in a chauvinistic culture, etc. And so this is normal. It's abuse, but normal. So because I haven't shut off that part of my own feminine side as thoroughly, I feel the intense pain and grief in the feminine side of Fred Burks that he will not feel. And it sounded to me from his exploration of childhood when I talked to him that his father's goal was to break his spirit. And his method was to cause Fred Burks pain, grief, and suffering in a continual barragement until Fred, out of deference to the law of mass, prioritized feeling less more than holding his position, and thus was broken. And that Fred told me he was determined not to be broken. That no matter how much his father hurt or pressured him, he would not be broken. Now, when there's a relationship between a much larger mass, a parent in a dependent relationship that has the reins or the keys, so to speak, to survival, if the father wants to kill the child, he does. To security, if the father wants to destabilize the child, he does. There's a law of mass that says that a 200-pound man can dominate, murder, whatever. I mean, every sleeping child is vulnerable to an abusive parent. One bash to the head with a baseball bat, whatever it is, you are vulnerable. Physically, emotionally, mentally, financially, and socially. And so you have a law of scale. And so when the emotional thermometer of a child is more sensitized and more cued to the parent than the other way around, because the child is in a dependent relationship with the father, is in a dependent relationship with all the grown-ups around, for survival, for security, for love and belonging, for self-esteem, the four primary human needs. So how does a child beat a father at a domination game? Well, you go sociopathic. You stop feeling so that you're not affected. You turn off the thermometer. That's one way to win against a sociopathic abuse power struggle. When I beat my father in a similar pattern of domination and humiliation, it was through two methods. The one was becoming a little bit smarter than my father so my father would lay all these mental traps, and then he would excoriate and humiliate the people who fell into the traps that he laid. So endless amounts of mental traps. And he did do this from the age of 5. And so by the age of 12, I'd watched a few thousand, attempts of a frustrated, regressed, traumatized boy in a grown-up body with a brilliant mind to just, shred everyone to pieces. And so I watched a few thousand of those games. He would do it at a 5-year-old, he'd do it at an 8-year-old, he'd do it at a 10-year-old. By 12 years old, you could see many of the pitfalls and reframings in a way that was always of demeaning and diminishment. You're basically a complete moron and idiot and stuff like that. And it's not probably accidental that when I'm incredibly, out of patience and just, really on the edge of helplessness, that I revert to the language of my father. But at any rate, the setups to humiliate someone for being perfectly normal became somewhat predictable after about a few thousand incidents. And so what I would do is I would wait, I would sense the gap that I was supposed to fall into, and then I would understand how my father had framed the question or framed the thing in order that I would have the highest probability of falling into the pit that he had dug. And then I would also understand how I was going to be humiliated when I fell in. So this is a construct. And what I would do is I would move around the pit. So if you imagine your father leading you, you're blindfolded, he's leading you along, but he's dug out a 10-foot hole with spikes in the ground. And he's gone to great trouble to dig this hole and sharpen the spikes and all that. And his greatest joy in life is to lead you up blindfolded and then push you into the hole and then watch you suffer and be impaled. And that's sadistic life in the United States by sociopathic, highly frustrated, highly traumatized men who, of course, have no clue how to get out of the pit that they're in themselves because we're a sociopathic, emotionally illiterate cult. It never occurs to educate boys or men about any of their suffering. We just humiliate the shit out of them, and they in turn do the same to their children and peers. So this was the phenomenon, being led by my father into these pits. And so I would, in this scenario, walk around the pit. We would sense it coming, and it's like, well, Dad, let me walk over here. You carry on, and let's walk around here. So so that was a way to turn the tables, to basically communicate in this way to my father, that I understood his cruelty, that I understood his brutality, that I saw where he was going. And because he was a moralist, a little bit like High and Fred Burke's, I'm passionate about the Me Too movement. I'm really keen on all this. I'm teaching and all this, but I don't want to learn about my own abuse patterns and stuff like that because I don't make mistakes. Dad doesn't make mistakes. Fred doesn't make mistakes. The high facilitators don't make mistakes. Therapists don't make mistakes. You have all these bullshitters up at the top of the power chain desperately trying to avoid being punished or shamed for doing something wrong. So they never make any mistakes. So when everything goes wrong, it's always the child's fault, the patient's fault, the citizen's fault, the lower employees. They'll take the hit. We'll fire several employees because a fucked up manager made $1 million mistake and that's the only way the company can recover. Well, why not fire the fucked up manager? But oh no, we can't have that. Let's, it's always pass the buck down. So there's obviously bitterness. And my father, once he understood that he couldn't entrap me psychologically, and that he often felt a little helpless and a little dumb when I, capered around the pits that he had spent so much time digging so that, others could impale themselves on. He just turned his attention to someone else and started abusing, other people, which he did until his death. And so that kind of thing. The thing that really drove me mad, and so you see that in this dynamic here, is my parents' pathological commitment to each of their children being invisible in the areas that they were sadistically harmed. Meaning all my siblings, I watched them deteriorate mentally, emotionally, and physically under the barrage of sadistic psychological attacks and shame of my parents. But my parents were these wonderful, progressive, liberal hippies who sent the kids to Waldorf school, where, incidentally, I was psychologically and physically abused by my Waldorf teachers. Guess what? You can take a 5-year-old and send them down into a dark room and tell them they'll be eaten by witches. And when the same bullshit is going on at home in abandonment dynamics, and when there's no sane champion of an adult, guess what? A 5-year-old is terrified repeatedly at home, terrified repeatedly by their kindergarten teacher. Liberal Waldorf education. And yes, a child feels shamed when, their French teacher. You see, when you develop traumatic symptoms, it's very hard to concentrate. And of course, teachers in their stupidity think this is all about them, that you're going out of your way to ruin the teacher's life, as opposed to you're systematically abused at home. I mean, who could imagine abuse in America? What a novel idea. So then the French teacher, says, put your hands in the desk, and slams the desk down, and then blames the child. Well, I thought you would remove your hands. You see? We're going to beat the shit out of you for fighting for your survival. But so then you learn not to fight, because it's more dangerous to fight for your survival than it is to cooperate with the abuse. Because cowards who don't know what it is to be an adult fly into a rage when a child defies them by actually having healthy boundaries. So when you get beaten up for protesting abuse, you healthily learn that you're in a sadistic environment where you shouldn't fight the abuser because they're bigger than you and they're assholes. So you have your hand, so you cooperate, and then you're shamed for that as well. Again, no interest in the family system. So, there's just this continual wave of scapegoating, shaming, and abusing under the most noble circumstances. Fred Burks wants to expose corruption and conspiracy in every area but his own psyche and in his relationships and in his community. Fuck you. I mean, we don't need more hypocrisy. The parents want to have this great liberal thing, etc., in every area except understanding the truth of their abuse system. It doesn't matter how much you pay for fucking private school. It's not what makes a good parent. Particularly when you don't know how to, train or supervise teachers, and there's a collusion to mutually abuse and protect each other at the expense of the child. Doesn't matter. And high, the commitment to a world where everyone wins except their clients. Committed to healing ignorance and fear except in the facilitator body. Who needs another fucked up teacher? So there's these patterns build up. And what I want to emphasize is the correlation between sustained, repeated violation at high levels of pain in a sadistic sociopathic protocol and violence. Meaning, I'm at the point where, having been, I've never been in a fist fight in my life, but this is getting on my nerves. You know, it seems healthy at some point to punch someone in the nose and say, wake up, fucker, and stop adding to the problem with your hypocrisy and stupidity. It's bad enough being a fucked up asshole and saying I'm a fucked up asshole. It gets toxic when you try and teach your stupidity as love. So, you know, and so I understand why we're a violent cult. Pain that is sadistically ignored and amplified leads to violence. So, of course, I can dissociate myself from Fred, having gone through his, 10-year protocol of stupidity and cruelty. But should everyone have to do that? And, then you say, well, the other people are at choice. Are you really at choice when you don't understand trauma? When you can't tell the difference between love and hate? When someone can treat you cruelly with a warm smile and pat on the back? Are you really at choice in an emotionally illiterate, psychologically abused? Are you at choice? Because I don't feel a choice. I haven't felt a choice until I read 1,000 hours of the literature and understood just exactly how fucked up we all are, and that it's not the individual's fault. It's these continual coercions from one thing to another. And the worst thing about it is when it's called love.